The stars stretched endlessly beyond the observation deck of the UES, defiant as Captain Jake Morrison sipped his morning coffee. 3 years of peaceful exploration in the Outer Rim had given him a routine he cherished. Every morning at 0600 ship time, he would stand here watching the cosmos while his crew prepared for another day of discovery and diplomacy. Lieutenant Alex Chun approached from behind, her footsteps soft on the metal deck. Jake had learned to recognize each crew member by their walk over the years. Alex always moved with purpose, never wasting motion or time. She carried a datapad in her hands, and her expression told Jake that their peaceful morning was about to end. "Captain, we're receiving an incoming transmission from an unknown source," Alex reported. "The signal is incredibly powerful, stronger than anything we've encountered from the local species. It's coming from the direction of the Zephyrian Empire territories." Jake set down his coffee cup and followed Alex to the bridge. The Zephyrian Empire was known throughout this sector of space, though humans had never made direct contact with them, intelligence reports suggested. They were a militaristic species with advanced technology and a habit of conquering weaker civilizations. Most spacefaring races gave their territory a wide berth. On the bridge, Communications Officer Emma Stone looked up from her console with concern etched across her face. "Captain, they're demanding immediate contact with whoever commands human forces in this sector." Their tone is not diplomatic. Jake settled into his command chair and straightened his uniform. First contact situations required careful handling, especially with unknown aggressive species. He had trained for this moment throughout his career. A theory felt different when faced with reality. "Put them through, Emma. Let's see what they want." The main view screen flickered to life, revealing a creature that made Jake's blood run cold. Admiral Kekstar stood nearly 8 feet tall, his reptilian features dominated by cold yellow eyes and rows of sharp teeth. Scales covered his body in patterns of dark green and black, and ceremonial armor adorned with what looked like bone trophies completed his intimidating appearance. "I am Admiral Kekstar, Supreme Commander of the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet." The alien spoke in perfect English, though his voice carried a hissing quality that made every word sound like a threat. "You will identify yourself, human?" Jake kept his voice steady and professional. "I am Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Defiant. We represent the human colonies in this sector. How may we assist you?" Kekstar's lips pulled back in what might have been a smile, revealing even more teeth. "Assist me? You misunderstand your position, primitive. I do not require assistance from lesser beings. I come with an ultimatum that will determine whether your pathetic species lives or dies." The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of ship systems. Jake felt the eyes of his crew upon him, waiting to see how he would respond to such obvious provocation. Years of diplomatic training told him to remain calm and seek understanding, but every instinct screamed that this alien meant serious harm. "To humanity, we're listening," Jake replied simply. "The territories you call the Outer Rim colonies belong to the Zephyrian Empire," Kekstar continued. "They are ancient hunting grounds sacred to my people, defiled by your presence for too long. You have 72 hours to evacuate every human from these systems. Take nothing but the clothes on your backs. Leave your cities, your farms, your stations, everything." Navigator Paul Knight looked up from his station with barely concealed anger. "Captain, there are over 15 million civilians in the outer colonies. Even if we had the transport capacity, which we don't, 72 hours isn't nearly enough time to evacuate everyone safely." Jake raised a hand slightly, signaling Paul to remain quiet while keeping his eyes fixed on the alien admiral. "That timeline is impossible. Our people need more time, and we would need to discuss compensation for the infrastructure we've built over decades of settlement." Kekstar's roar of laughter sent chills through every human on the bridge. "Compensation? You speak of compensation to your betters? There will be no negotiation, no discussion, no mercy. 72 hours, or we will cleanse these systems of human contamination ourselves. Your choice is simple: flee like the cowards you are, or die like the vermin you've proven to be." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Jake stared at the blank screen for several moments before turning to address his crew. Each face showed the same mixture of shock, anger, and determination that he felt building in his own chest. "Emma, get me an immediate priority channel." To Earth Command. "Alex, I want everything our intelligence networks know about Zephyrian military capabilities on my desk within the hour." Paul, plot courses to every major colony in the Outer Rim. We need to warn them what's coming. As his crew sprang into action, Jake walked back to the observation deck where his coffee sat cooling and forgotten. The stars looked different now. No longer peaceful points of light but potential battlegrounds, where human lives hung in the balance. The communication with Earth Command took several hours due to the vast distances involved. But when President Linda Carter's face appeared on his personal screen, Jake could see that word of the crisis had already reached the highest levels of government. "Captain Morrison, I've been briefed on your encounter with the Zephyrian Admiral," President Carter said. "The Global Defense Council is meeting in emergency session as we speak. What's your assessment of the situation?" Jake chose his words carefully. "Madam President, this Admiral Kekstar wasn't making empty threats. His species has a reputation for following through on their ultimatums, and from what I observed, he views humans as nothing more than pests to be exterminated." President Carter nodded grimly. "Our xenobiologists agree with your assessment. Dr. Helen Brooks consulted every file we have on Zephyrian culture and psychology. They consider backing down from a declared position to be the ultimate dishonor. If this Kekstar said 72 hours, he means exactly that." "Then we need to begin immediate evacuation of the colonies," Jake replied. "Even if we can't save everyone, we have to try to save who we can." "Already in motion, Captain. Every available transport ship is being redirected to the Outer Rim." "But Jake, there's something else you need to know. Our long-range sensors are detecting massive fleet movements in Zephyrian space. Whatever they're planning, it's going to be big." The transmission ended, leaving Jake alone with the weight of what was coming. 15 million innocent people faced extermination because an alien empire wanted hunting grounds that humans had peacefully settled. The universe had just become a much darker and more dangerous place. The first explosions lit up the dawn sky over New Haven Colony like deadly fireworks. Colony Governor Rick Palmer stood on his office balcony watching the orbital bombardment tear his world apart. 67 hours had passed since Admiral Kekstar's ultimatum, and the Zephyrian fleet had arrived 5 hours early. Rick had spent those 3 days in a desperate race against time. Every transport ship within 50 light-years had been diverted to New Haven and the other outer colonies. The evacuation proceeded around the clock, but with 3 million colonists to move and limited ship capacity, everyone knew they wouldn't finish in time. The evacuation centers buzzed with controlled panic as families gathered whatever belongings they could carry. Mary Johnson held her crying baby while her husband Tom loaded their few precious possessions into a hover cart. They had built their farm on New Haven from nothing, turning barren soil into fertile fields that fed thousands. Now they had minutes to abandon everything they had worked for. "All civilians report to evacuation zones immediately," the colony-wide announcement echoed across the settlement. "This is not a drill. Zephyrian forces have entered the system." Rick watched as massive alien warships descended through the atmosphere, like metallic angels of death. The Zephyrian vessels were unlike anything in human design, all sharp angles and predatory curves that spoke of a species built for war. Their hulls gleamed with an oily darkness that seemed to absorb light itself. The first energy beams lanced down from orbit, turning the colonial administration building into a crater of melted metal and glass. Rick barely had time to dive for cover as the shockwave shattered every window in a 3-block radius. The bombardment had begun in earnest. Dr. Susan Blake ran through the hospital corridors, helping to evacuate patients who couldn't walk on their own. The medical facility had been designated as a priority target for evacuation, but many patients were too sick or injured to be moved safely. When she saw the alien ships beginning their attack, she made the hardest decision of her career. She would stay with those who couldn't leave, providing what comfort she could in their final moments. The Zephyrian bombardment showed no distinction between military and civilian targets. Schools, hospitals, residential areas, and farms all burned with equal intensity. Commander Vexon, leading the attack from his flagship, had received clear orders from Admiral Kekstar. This was not conquest, but extermination. A message to humanity about the price of defying Zephyrian authority. Captain Jake Morrison arrived with the small human defense fleet just as the last evacuation ships lifted off from New Haven's surface. His heart sank as he watched the beautiful colony world dying beneath alien weapons fire. Cities that had taken decades to build were reduced to smoking ruins in minutes. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from Governor Palmer," Communications Officer Emma Stone reported from her station. "He's still planet-side." Rick Palmer's face appeared on the main screen, covered in dust and blood from falling debris. Behind him, fires raged across what had once been the colony's main settlement. "Captain Morrison, we got most of them out. Maybe 2 million people made it to the transport ships. But there are still civilians down here, trapped in the outer settlements." Jake felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on him. His small fleet couldn't fight the Zephyrian armada directly, but he couldn't abandon the remaining colonists either. "Governor, get yourself to the nearest evacuation point. We'll hold them off as long as we can." The space battle was brief and hopeless. Human ships, designed primarily for exploration and peaceful contact, faced Zephyrian warships built for domination and destruction. Jake's tactical officer, Lieutenant Alex Chun, did her best to coordinate defensive patterns, but the aliens had superior numbers, better weapons, and decades of military experience. The Use Defender, Jake's escort frigate, exploded in a ball of superheated plasma after taking direct hits from 3 Zephyrian cruisers. Captain Nancy Lewis and her entire crew of 43 were vaporized instantly. Jake watched helplessly as another ship in his small fleet, the Use Guardian, suffered catastrophic damage and began falling toward New Haven's surface. "Captain, Governor Palmer is requesting immediate evacuation," Emma reported. "His shuttle is the last one on the surface." Jake ordered his ship to provide cover fire while Palmer's shuttle lifted off from the dying colony. The small civilian craft dodged falling debris and energy beams as it struggled to reach escape velocity. Jake held his breath until the shuttle cleared the atmosphere and jumped to hyperspace, carrying Rick Palmer and the few dozen colonists who had helped with the final evacuation efforts. The pattern repeated across 7 human colonies over the next 18 hours. Each time, the Zephyrians arrived without warning and began immediate bombardment of population centers. Each time, human defense forces were overwhelmed by superior alien technology and ruthless tactics on Harmony Station. Chief Engineer Lisa White sent her final transmission as Zephyrian troops boarded the mining platform. "They're not taking prisoners," she reported over the emergency channel. "Repeat, they are executing everyone who surrenders. This is extermination, not conquest." The message sent chills through every human who heard it. Wars between civilized species usually involved rules about treatment of civilians and prisoners. The Zephyrians followed no such conventions. They viewed humans as vermin to be eliminated, not enemies to be defeated. At Frontier Base, Lieutenant Colonel Mike Davis made humanity's first successful stand against the alien invaders. Using mining equipment as improvised weapons, his small garrison managed to destroy 3 Zephyrian cruisers before they could begin orbital bombardment. The victory provided a brief moment of hope that human ingenuity might overcome alien superiority, but the hope didn't last. Admiral Kekstar himself arrived at Frontier Base aboard his massive flagship, the Apex Predator. The alien admiral took personal command of the assault, determined to crush this small human resistance before it could inspire others. "You fought well for primitives," Kekstar broadcast to the surviving human defenders. "I will ensure your deaths are appropriately painful as reward for your defiance." The final bombardment of Frontier Base lasted 6 hours. When it ended, nothing remained but a glowing crater where the human outpost had stood. Mike Davis and his 300 defenders had bought precious time for civilian evacuations elsewhere, but they paid for it with their lives. In 72 hours, 15 million humans had died and humanity's entire outer rim presence had been erased. The Zephyrian fleet now turned toward the inner colonies, including the Mars settlements and Jupiter mining stations. Admiral Kekstar's message to humanity was clear: submission or extinction, with no middle ground possible. The news reached Earth 48 hours after the last colony died. President Linda Carter stood in the World Parliament chamber, her hands gripping the podium as she stared out at representatives from every nation on the planet. The silence in the Great Hall was absolute, broken only by the quiet sobs of those who had family in the outer colonies. 15 million of our people are dead, President Carter said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. Men, women, children. Elderly, sick, healthy, it made no difference to the Zephyrians. They killed everyone they could find and destroyed everything we built. The footage from the colonies played on screens throughout the chamber. Cities reduced to glass craters, orbital stations torn apart by alien weapons, the burned remains of farms where families had lived for generations. Representative after representative watched their constituents die in real time, recorded by the final transmissions of brave souls who stayed behind to document the massacre. Senator Bill Rogers from the North American Federation stood slowly, his face pale with shock and rage. Madam President, what are our options? We cannot let this stand unpunished. President Carter's eyes hardened as she looked across the assembled world leaders. There's only one option left to us. I am authorizing the activation of Protocol 7. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. Protocol 7 was humanity's deepest secret, a military program so classified that only a handful of people knew it existed. Even among those few, the full details were known only to the President and her closest advisors. Deep beneath the Canadian Rockies, Dr. Sandra Pearce received the authorization codes that she had hoped never to see. For 20 years, she had led the team developing Project Nemesis, humanity's ultimate weapon. The project consumed enormous resources and the best scientific minds on Earth, all working toward a goal that terrified everyone involved. Sandra walked through the underground facility, past laboratories filled with equipment that pushed the boundaries of human knowledge. Quantum mechanics, stellar engineering, exotic matter manipulation, all combined into something that could theoretically destroy entire star systems. The weapon represented humanity's potential for creation turned toward absolute destruction. Dr. Pearce were receiving final authorization from the President, her assistant, Dr. Kevin Walsh, reported. All safety protocols are being waived. We have full authority to deploy Nemesis. Sandra nodded grimly as she entered the main control center. Banks of computers hummed with calculations that strained the limits of human mathematics. The quantum destabilization array was humanity's most advanced achievement and its most terrible mistake. She had spent decades hoping it would never be used, but the images from the outer colonies left no room for moral hesitation. Captain Jake Morrison, now promoted to admiral in recognition of his efforts to save civilian lives, stood on the bridge of humanity's newest warship. The UES Retribution was unlike any vessel humans had built before, designed specifically for warfare rather than exploration. Its hull bristled with weapons that had never been tested in combat, powered by reactors that could fuel a small city. Admiral, the fleet is assembled and ready, Commander Ryan Adams reported. Ryan had been pulled from Earth's strategic planning division, one of the brightest tactical minds humanity had produced. His job was to find a way to get human forces close enough to the Zephyrian home system to deploy Project Nemesis. The combined human fleet represented every military vessel Earth could spare. Exploration ships had been hastily retrofitted with weapons, cargo haulers converted into troop transports, even civilian luxury liners pressed into service as hospital ships. It was an impressive sight, but everyone knew it was inadequate against the Zephyrian Imperial Navy. Major Kelly Turner, the fleet's weapons specialist, briefed the senior officers on their new armaments. These plasma cannons are reverse-engineered from Zephyrian technology we salvaged from the outer colonies. The particle beams should penetrate their shields, and the quantum torpedoes will cause massive hull damage. Jake listened to the technical specifications while studying tactical displays of the Zephyrian home system. Cathara was heavily fortified, surrounded by defense platforms and patrol fleets. Getting close enough to deploy Nemesis would require sacrifice on a scale that made his stomach turn on the alien homeworld of Cathara. Civilian engineer Datar worked late in his laboratory, troubleshooting problems with the fleet's weapon systems. The victory over the human colonies had been swift and complete, but something bothered him about intercepted human communications he had analyzed for intelligence purposes. The humans weren't the savage primitives that Admiral Kekstar described in his reports. Their final transmissions spoke of protecting families, evacuating civilians, sacrificing themselves for others. Datar had studied dozens of species conquered by the Zephyrian Empire, and none had shown such consistent concern for their weakest members. Dr. Lisa White's final message from Harmony Station particularly disturbed him. She had stayed behind to help evacuate patients from a medical facility, knowing she would die in the process. Datar's own species would have abandoned the weak without hesitation, viewing such sacrifice as wasteful stupidity. The moral questions multiplied as Datar continued his analysis. Why did human soldiers die protecting civilians instead of saving themselves? Why did their leaders apologize for not evacuating everyone when any reasonable species would have saved only the most valuable individuals? These humans seemed to operate by principles that made no logical sense from a Zephyrian perspective. Meanwhile, Admiral Kekstar prepared for the next phase of human extermination. Intelligence reports indicated that the surviving human colonies were organizing some form of military response. The Admiral found this amusing rather than concerning. Human technology was primitive compared to Zephyrian weapons, and their species lacked the killer instinct necessary for effective warfare. Commander Vexon, prepare the fleet for assault on the inner human colonies, Kekstar ordered. We will crush this pathetic resistance and finish what we started. The Mars settlements should provide excellent target practice for our newer crews. Back on Earth, Admiral Jake Morrison received his final briefing from President Carter. The weight of what they were about to attempt pressed down on everyone in the room. They were planning to attack the most powerful military force in this sector of the galaxy with weapons that had never been tested in actual combat. Jake, I need you to understand what you're carrying, President Carter said quietly. Project Nemesis isn't just a weapon. It's the sum total of human scientific achievement turned toward destruction. If this fails, there won't be a second chance. Jake nodded as he studied the deployment procedures for the quantum destabilization array. The device was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Once activated, it would cause a controlled stellar collapse that would consume everything within several light years of the target star. Madam President, what about Zephyrian civilians? Their homeworld has billions of non-combatants. President Carter's expression didn't change, but Jake saw the pain in her eyes. Admiral, they made the choice when they decided to exterminate 15 million of our people. We tried diplomacy. We tried evacuation. They chose genocide. Now they get to live with the consequences. Admiral Kekstar stood over the captured human prisoners on Mars, his yellow eyes gleaming with satisfaction as cameras recorded every moment. The red planet's thin atmosphere made the alien's voice sound even more menacing as he addressed the galaxy through hijacked human communication networks. Behold the fate of all who defy the Zephyrian Empire, Kekstar announced, his clawed hand resting on the shoulder of Colonial Administrator Steve Parker. These vermin thought their primitive weapons could challenge our superiority. Now they will serve as examples of what happens to inferior species who forget their place. Steve Parker had governed the Mars colonies for 12 years, turning the harsh red world into humanity's second most important settlement. He had seen the planet grow from a handful of research stations to a thriving community of 2 million people. Now he knelt in chains before an alien monster, knowing his death would be broadcast to every human in the galaxy. You want to know what humans are, Kekstar? Steve said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. We're the species that remembers. Every person you've killed, every child you've murdered, we remember them all, and we're coming for you. Kekstar's roar of laughter echoed across the Martian landscape as he drew his ceremonial blade. Empty words from a dying primitive. Your species will be extinct within the year, and the galaxy will forget you ever existed. The blade fell, and Steve Parker died as he had lived, defiant in the face of impossible odds. But his words and his courage were transmitted across human space, reaching every survivor of the Outer Colony massacres. The message was clear: humanity would not go quietly into extinction on Earth. President Linda Carter watched the execution with tears streaming down her face. The World Parliament chamber fell silent as representatives witnessed the brutal murder of one of their most respected colonial governors. The last voices calling for restraint and negotiation died with Steve Parker on the red sands of Mars. The authorization stands, President Carter said quietly. Admiral Morrison, you have full authority to deploy Project Nemesis. May God forgive U.S. for what we're about to do. Admiral Jake Morrison received the final authorization codes while his fleet prepared for the most dangerous journey in human history. The combined armada of Earth's military forces looked impressive on the tactical displays, but everyone knew they faced overwhelming odds. The Zephyrian home system was protected by defense fleets that outnumbered humanity's entire navy. All ships, this is Admiral Morrison, Jake broadcast to the assembled fleet. In 72 hours, over 15 million of our people were murdered by an alien empire that views us as vermin to be exterminated. Today, we carry the hopes and dreams of every human who ever looked up at the stars and imagined a better future among them. Commander Ryan Adams studied the intelligence reports one final time, his tactical genius focused on finding a path through impossible defenses. The Zephyrian home system of Tethara was a fortress built over centuries of conquest and expansion. Getting close enough to deploy the quantum destabilization array would require sacrifices that made his stomach turn. Admiral, I've identified a possible approach vector, Ryan reported. If we can punch through their outer defense perimeter here, we might be able to reach deployment range. But it will cost us at least half the fleet, maybe more. Jake nodded grimly as he studied the battle plans. Every scenario ended the same way, with human ships burning in the darkness of space, while their crews died for a chance to strike back at humanity's tormentors. But the alternative was extinction, and that was no choice at all on the Zephyrian homeworld. Engineer Datar made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The moral questions raised by his analysis of human behavior had grown into something he could no longer ignore. These weren't the savage primitives his leaders claimed, but a species with values and principles that his own people had abandoned long ago. Datar accessed the secret communication array in his engineering section, knowing that discovery meant death for treason. His clawed fingers worked quickly across alien controls as he prepared a message for the approaching human fleet. If he was going to betray his own species, he would at least make sure the betrayal served a purpose. Human vessels, this is Zephyrian civilian engineer Datar broadcasting on emergency frequencies. He transmitted into the darkness of space. I have analyzed your communications from the colony attacks. You are not the savages our leaders claim. Your species protects its weak and values individual life in ways mine has forgotten. The message included detailed schematics of Kethara's defensive systems, weak points in the orbital platforms, and patrol schedules that could give the human fleet a chance at reaching their target. Datar knew he was signing his own death warrant, but watching the execution of Steve Parker had convinced him that some things were worth dying for. Zephyrian security forces intercepted the transmission within minutes. Datar felt no surprise when armed guards surrounded his workstation, their weapons trained on his chest. He had made his choice with full knowledge of the consequences. Traitor, spat Security Chief Mortek as he placed Datar under arrest. You betray your own species for primitive aliens who will be extinct within days. Datar looked up at his captor with something approaching pity. I betray nothing. I try to save what little honor our species has left. These humans fight too. protect their families while we murder children for sport. Which of us is truly primitive? The human fleet received Ditar's intelligence data just as they entered Zephyrian space. Admiral Morrison studied the information carefully, his tactical officers working to integrate the alien engineers' insights into their battle plans. The data was invaluable, but it also carried a terrible weight of responsibility. Sir, if this intelligence is accurate, we have a real chance of reaching deployment range, Major Kelly Turner reported. But we'll still lose most of the fleet getting there. Jake looked out at the stars that surrounded the Zephyrian home system, each point of light representing billions of lives that would end if their mission succeeded. The moral weight of planetary extinction pressed down on him like a physical force, but the images of murdered human colonists burned even brighter in his memory. The first Zephyrian patrol fleet engaged the human armada at the edge of the system, beginning a running battle that would determine the fate of both species. Human ships, outnumbered and outgunned, fought with desperate courage against an enemy that had shown no mercy to their people. Captain Nancy Lewis commanded the UES Retribution, one of humanity's newest warships built specifically for this mission. Her vessel carried some of the most advanced weapons human science could produce, but even those seemed inadequate against Zephyrian technology. All weapons, concentrate fire on their flagship, Nancy ordered as her ship shuddered under alien attack. If we're going down, we're taking as many of them with us as possible. The space battle raged for hours as human forces pushed deeper into the Zephyrian system. Ship after ship fell to superior alien firepower, their crews dying in the cold vacuum of space. But for every human vessel destroyed, the survivors moved closer to their ultimate target. Dr. Sandra Pierce stood before the quantum destabilization array aboard the UES Judgment, her hands trembling as she entered the final activation codes. The massive device hummed with power that could tear apart the fabric of space itself, representing 20 years of human scientific achievement turned toward the darkest purpose imaginable. Dr. Pierce, we're in position, Admiral Jake Morrison announced from the bridge above. Cathara S star is locked in our targeting array. The Zephyrian defense fleets are closing fast, but we have maybe 10 minutes before they overrun our position. Sandra looked at the readouts showing stellar composition, gravitational fields, and quantum fluctuation patterns of the Zephyrian home star. Once she pressed the activation switch, nothing in the known universe could stop the chain reaction that would consume an entire solar system. Billions of lives would end in nuclear fire, but 15 million human ghosts demanded justice. The space battle around Cathara had cost humanity dearly. Captain Nancy Lewis and the UES Retribution had sacrificed themselves to punch through the outer defense perimeter, ramming their ship into a Zephyrian dreadnought to clear a path for the main fleet. Dozens of other vessels lay burning in the darkness, their crews dead so that Project Nemesis could reach its target. Admiral Kekstar watched the human attack from his flagship with growing alarm. These primitives were fighting with a ferocity and determination that defied everything he thought he knew about their species. Human ships continued advancing even when crippled and burning, their crews choosing death over retreat. All fleets, converge on the human flagship immediately, Kekstar ordered his commanders. These vermin carry something that threatens the homeworld. Whatever it costs, we must stop them. It was too late. Sandra Pierce had already activated the quantum destabilization array, sending invisible streams of exotic particles racing toward Cathara S star at the speed of light. The stellar collapse would begin within minutes, and nothing Zephyrian science understood could reverse the process. On the surface of Cathara, civilian populations went about their daily lives unaware that their star was dying above them. Children played in alien parks while their parents worked in towering cities that stretched toward the sky. None of them knew that human weapons were already rewriting the fundamental forces that held their sun together. Ditar sat in his prison cell deep beneath the planetary capital, watching through a small window as the first signs of stellar instability began to manifest. Solar flares erupted from the star's surface with unnatural violence, sending waves of radiation that interfered with planetary communications. He had helped make this possible, and the weight of billions of deaths pressed down on his conscience. "The star is destabilizing," Datar whispered to himself as he watched the sky begin to change color. "The humans actually did it. They built a weapon that can kill stars." Admiral Morrison broadcast his final message to the Zephyrian homeworld. As human and alien fleets continued their deadly dance around the dying star, his words would be heard by billions of beings who had hours left to live, a species facing extinction for the crimes of their military leaders. "People of Cathara, I am Admiral Jake Morrison of the human fleet," he announced across all communication frequencies. "Your leaders chose to exterminate 15 million innocent civilians in the outer colonies. They showed no mercy to children, elderly, or sick. They called us vermin and promised to hunt down every human in the galaxy." The transmission continued as the star's convulsions grew more violent, solar storms lashing the planet with radiation that began causing electronic failures across the surface. "You have 1 hour before your star goes nova. We offer safe passage to any civilian evacuation ships that leave immediately. We are not you. We do not murder innocents for the crimes of their leaders." Admiral Kekstar's roar of rage echoed across his flagship's bridge as he realized the magnitude of what the humans had accomplished. These primitive aliens had built a weapon beyond Zephyrian comprehension, something that could destroy entire star systems. The implications terrified him more than his own approaching death. "Impossible," Kekstar snarled as he watched stellar readings that made no scientific sense. "How can such inferior beings possess technology that surpasses our greatest achievements?" "Commander." Ryan Adams monitored Zephyrian civilian communications as panic spread across their homeworld. Emergency broadcasts filled the airwaves as billions of beings realized their sun was dying. Evacuation ships launched frantically from spaceports across the planet, carrying whatever population they could save in the time remaining. "Admiral, we're detecting massive civilian evacuations," Ryan reported. "Thousands of ships fleeing the system. Your offer of safe passage is being taken seriously." Jake nodded grimly as he watched the refugee ships streaming away from their doomed homeworld. These were innocent beings whose only crime was being born into an empire ruled by genocidal monsters. Humanity's moral superiority meant protecting them even while destroying their world. The stellar collapse accelerated beyond all predictions, Cathara's star growing brighter and more unstable with each passing minute. Solar flares erupted with the force of nuclear weapons, bathing the planet in radiation that began sterilizing the surface. The end was coming faster than anyone had expected. Datar felt the prison building shake as seismic activity increased across the planet. The star's death throes were affecting Cathara's gravitational field, causing earthquakes and tidal forces that tore at the world's crust. He had perhaps minutes left to live, but he felt something approaching peace as he watched justice unfold. In the sky above, Admiral Kekstar made one final attempt to rally his remaining forces for a desperate attack on the human fleet. All ships ramming speed. "If we die today, we take these primitive animals with us." But his crews were abandoning their posts, racing for escape pods and evacuation shuttles as their homeworld burned beneath an increasingly violent star. The Zephyrian Imperial Navy, terror of a dozen conquered species, dissolved into chaos as its members chose survival over duty. Dr. Sandra Pierce watched the stellar readings with professional fascination and personal horror. The quantum destabilization was proceeding exactly as her calculations predicted, but the reality of planetary extinction felt different from theoretical models. She had become the destroyer of worlds, and the knowledge would haunt her for whatever remained of her life. Cathara's star reached critical mass 47 minutes after the quantum array activated. The explosion that followed was visible from neighboring star systems, a brief new sun that outshone every other object in the sky. When the light faded, nothing remained of the Zephyrian homeworld, except expanding clouds of superheated gas and the scattered refugee ships that had escaped in time. Admiral Morrison stood on his bridge watching the death of a civilization, feeling no satisfaction in the justice they had delivered. 15 million human lives had been avenged, but the cost was measured in billions of alien deaths. The moral weight of genocide, even justified genocide, would burden humanity for generations to come. The few surviving Zephyrian refugees scattered to distant worlds, carrying with them the knowledge that humanity was not the primitive species their leaders had claimed. They had witnessed the complete destruction of the galaxy's most powerful empire by beings they had been taught to consider inferior. The lesson would spread throughout known space, ensuring that no other species would make the mistake of threatening human civilians.